Welcome to another episode of Just One More Fix. This is James. With me in this episode is Lacey.
Hey.
You can find us online at justonemorefix.com or on Twitter at justonemorefix. If you like us, head over to iTunes or to Google Play and give us a rating and a comment. In this episode, we're going to talk about getting your players to try new RPGs. And now, it's time to get our gaming fix.
I'm Stargate Pioneer.
I'm Haley, and I'm Lauren from Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D.,
a podcast member of the Gonna Geek Network, just like the one you're listening to now.
The opinions expressed are those of each individual. Check out all the other podcasts at GonnaGeekNetwork.com and get ready because geekiness begins in 3, 2,
1.
Welcome to another episode of Just One More Fix. Quick announcement. As you guys have hopefully heard if you've been listening to us for a few weeks now, we are still working on our Patreon, and that should be happening this month. Just working out the kinks and details so we don't have to move things around. We want to get it put up once and then let it sit the way it is with the reward tiers and that kind of stuff. So look for that coming this month. And if you have any suggestions for things that you would like to see on there or suggestions for anything, really, I guess, you can either hit us up on Twitter at Just One More Fix, or you can email me, Carrie, or Kurt, and they're all James at Just One More Fix, Carrie at Just One More Fix, or Kurt at Just One More Fix. So I think that's the only announcement for today, so I guess we'll just jump right into this.
The My Little Pony movie comes out this week.
Oh, well.
I just thought maybe you should mention that.
Right on. We did try Tales of Equestria. I didn't try it, but Carrie ran it at HillCon for all the little ones. But anyway, so today we're going to talk, that's neither here nor there, I suppose. Today we're going to talk about introducing your players, or I guess getting your players to try new RPGs.
This is directly relevant. How would you suggest we get you to play Tales of Equestria?
Get me to play Tales from Equestria?
Yeah.
I would go with large amounts of alcohol and maybe some sedation. that might do it.
And I think we've wrapped up our topic for today.
Done. Sounds good. So obviously the lesson here is you might have to go to extreme measures sometimes to get people to try games that are really just aren't interested in. But we mentioned several episodes ago, I think at the very beginning, that one of the goals that we had set out for our table was that we have a ridiculous amount of games that are on our bookshelves and that we wanted to try and get through and play most of them. And we have done that, except for this thing called Gen Con happened, and we added a whole bunch more games to it now. So we've kind of moved.
I only added like 2.
I have this problem. I don't know if you've noticed or not. But so we've made a big dent in it, it's fair to say. And part of that has been by coercing our players to let me run these games for them. And also Lacey has introduced a couple new games to our table. And sometimes it's been an easy sell, and sometimes it hasn't. So I thought one of the things I also see on forums a lot of times is I've been playing D&D or Pathfinder or some other D20 elf game, as Kyle said yesterday, if it has D20s and elves in it. They've been playing these games for the better part of a year now, and now they want to try a different game. But most of their players aren't interested in playing something else besides those D&D style games, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you think of a game that you weren't interested in here at our table that we ended up playing or trying out?
Monster Hearts.
You weren't interested in that?
Nope.
Really? I'm surprised. Man, right on. What was it about Monster Hearts that you didn't find interesting?
All of it.
Just the entire idea of
I didn't want to be in the whole WB
teenage
supernatural romance section of the world.
Right on. And
that's not my thing.
What convinced you to try it out?
Peer pressure.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody else at the table wanted to play it.
Okay, so then you're just kind of going along for the ride?
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't want to be not able to play.
Yeah.
You're like, fine, we're just going to play it without you then. Okay, I'll sit over here.
There is zero fun having right now, right?
Watch you guys play.
The initial part of that is that I kind of worked to sell the game because, well, I am not a fan of the WB style stuff, Charmed and all that, or Buffy. Just not a fan of it. But I really, really enjoy Monster Hearts, which is kind of weird, but it's a fun game to play. Did you enjoy that game?
Yeah, I liked it a lot.
Okay, right. So there's one success story at least. But so initially, there were several people that weren't exactly interested in it. I didn't know that you weren't interested quite that much, and I know Lee wasn't that interested in it. Carrie really liked the idea of it, and Kurt is all about Buffy. He's a big-time Buffy fan. So they were easy sells, but part of what I did initially was to, which I think is a universal thing no matter what game that you're running, is to have built up trust in my players to say, hey, you've liked other games I ran. I have a cool idea for this. Why don't we just try it for a session or two and see how it goes?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. There's also, I don't know, like not related to the trust issue, I guess, but for the people we have in our lives that GM games, I want to play the games that they're most excited to run. Mm-hmm. So if you do a good job of projecting that excitement,
right,
then I'm going to be like, okay, well, I think that this might suck, but you seem excited about it, so
right.
I'll give it a shot.
So really sell the game. Pick it, if you're going to introduce a game that's outside of your normal wheelhouse of what you guys play at the table, then pick something new that you are excited to do and that you really want to run. And then before you go to sell that game to your players, think about what it is that you really like about that game. What makes that particular game different than any other RPG that's out there, right? Monster Hearts being our initial example, I don't think there's any other game out there that emulates Buffy the Vampire Slayer or any of that kind of style game better than Monster Hearts, really, to be honest. That whole supernatural romance kind of, teenage
when you
thing.
Say the genre out loud, I just feel like this inward cringe. I think mostly I'm just upset because the last time I went to the bookstore, there was no horror section, but there was an entire section of supernatural romance.
It is
paranormal romance.
Yeah.
It's like, this is bullshit.
Right on. I agree.
I'm not shopping here anymore. I'm just kidding because it's the only bookstore in town.
But although that's not just that bookstore, it's almost every bookstore. Like Barnes & Nobles, all of them don't have it anymore, it seems like. Although it still is a search term in Amazon, so that
I
works.
will say, though, that when I went to the Barnes & Noble, I asked, hey, where's you guys' horror section? And they were like, we don't have one. And then, I think the look of disappointment on my face was palpable. So I had not one store employee, but 3 separate store employees guide me to their specific favorite horror books and give me a list of 2 or 3.
Right.
What were we talking about?
So I guess there's a little bit of a tangent there, but either way, so just make sure that whatever game that is you're going to try and get your players to buy into, that you're excited about it, and you've made a plan for how you want to try and sell the game to them, focusing on what the game does best and what the game is about. Because every game features some kind of thing,
And just in life in general, don't be afraid to manipulate your friends. So you know, for the most part, what they like. So if you have, like that player that really likes the wizard, maybe you can show them some of these cool things they could be doing that are wizard-esque in this game. Or maybe you have your combat monkey, but they love D&D and have never played White Wolf. But maybe you could be like, but look at Potence.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Look what you could be doing with this.
You could literally punch through people's heads right now. Yeah, exactly. 100%.
Cater to those special needs.
Well, especially in some of the bigger games that are bigger, as the game gets bigger and broader, there are more features to the game that are going to appeal to a wider audience, I guess. And it makes it easier to sell to those people. I guess one thing to mention, though, is whatever you sell the game on, make sure you deliver on that. So you can't sell a game, you can't sell World of Darkness like Vampires Masquerade style and deliver Monster Hearts, right? I'm just saying, one is like personal horror and political drama, and in a not cutesy kind of a way, like with terrible consequences and loss of humanity and all this wickedness, right? Whereas the WB, like Monster Hearts, is a very softened, teenage paranormal drama romance. While there could be exist in the same kind of setting or world, they are drastically different, though.
It's solidly young adult content. It's
not adult.
Not adult content.
Right.
But I don't know. I think people probably use the World of Darkness system for that. It's not how I feel it should be used.
No, well, I mean, you can use it.
That's what your group enjoys.
Yeah, you can use it however you want.
Monster Hearts does it better, but you do you,
Exactly, yeah. Well, there's a lot of extra, pieces in there for World of Darkness. It's so very big. You can do nearly anything with it because you can very easily just run a D&D style game with just plain mortals if you wanted to. It's a very diverse system. So, all right. Do you have any other, I guess, broad advice for getting people to try these things other than gaining their trust by running good games, selling the games to them about what you're excited about, appealing to your players and what they would find interesting, and delivering on those promises?
I know that, a lot of us have it ingrained in us not to split the party, but if you really have like some people on board and you're excited about running a game and you have some people that are really just a hard no, because there's always going to be people you're not going to convince to do certain things. Like me, I'm not going to play a Star Wars RPG. It's not going to happen.
Right.
So leave those people out. I mean, have a separate game night for this other game, and either they'll suck it up and they'll come and do that game anyway, or they won't, and you'll see them next week when you run the other game again.
Right.
I mean, it's not the end of the world if not all 5 or 6 people decide they need to come. Maybe you only have 2 or 3, and that's okay.
Fair enough. Also, something that works well has worked well for us in the past is that sometimes people are not able to come, and we have several sort of games floating around for depending on who is here. So if someone is missing, we have different games for different groups, I guess. So like of the 5 people that are usually around our table, if we're short 1 or 2, then it sort of shifts what games we play, because sometimes we don't want to advance the plot for the main game that has everybody in it, right? And you could very easily do the same thing where if Kurt is is a good example of it. He's not interested in Vampire the Masquerade at all. He just doesn't find it compelling in any way, which he's wrong, but that's okay. But we play vampire games mainly when he's not here, and that works just fine. That way we get our vampire fix and he doesn't have to suffer through it. So
I think one of the things too that a sticking point for me when we play new things in something that creates a fair amount of resistance is whether or not I understand the tropes for the game that's going on. So like you have the Dresden Files game, but I don't know that world at all. I've never read a Dresden Files book.
Right.
And so a barrier for me is in wanting to play that game is just like I don't know what's going on. I don't understand the backstory. I don't know any of the content and the history there.
Right.
If you're wanting to run a game like that, maybe just give them basics about what's going on and introduce some of the history through gameplay so that they're not expected to know all of that ahead of time and be cognizant of it. It's kind of like when you do the Vampire the Masquerade thing and you have them start as neonates and you sort of give them like, whatever it is a
common sense, the merit.
Yeah. And like etiquette so that if they mess something up, they can kind of, take it back or whatever. And what's the flaw? Naive, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that...
I believe newly embraced or something along those lines, but yeah.
Right. So, you just give them sort of permission to be blissfully ignorant of what is going on, and then you learn about all those social structures and political things and abilities through gameplay.
Mm-hmm. Right on. The other one thing I wanted to mention is that in terms of if you're coming off of a long game, like a long D&D campaign or whatever, that it's easy to say, hey, before we jump into another big campaign, why don't we try this 1 or 2, maybe 3 session thing that I have planned, and it's a little bit different, and it'll be like a palate cleanser in a way.
Right.
And run that game like a one-shot. Drive the NPCs like they're rentals, let their players wreck the world and do whatever they want. Because, one, if it's a self-contained game, who cares? You don't have to worry about some overarching big plot getting wrecked or whatever. And you can feature the cool parts of the game to introduce them to it, and if they find the game interesting enough, then it opens the doors to run it again, either as a continuation of that game or build new characters and build a larger campaign or whatever it is that you're looking to do with it. But that way they kind of in the same way that when you go to a one-shot or a convention game, right, and you play it and there's a finality to it usually, and you leave with a certain amount of satisfaction for had a beginning, middle, and end, and that closure and that kind of excitement of we know this is only a 1-session or a 2-session thing, and we've got to finish this storyline off, and are we going to get the bad guy? Are we going to survive? Or whatever style of game it is that you're running, and then deliver on that, and hopefully if you finish on a high note, or a low note, I guess, depending on the style of game it is, or style of world, if it's Call of Cthulhu or whatever, then it opens the doors to hopefully try it again, I suppose. I guess those are our broad general things, but we want to talk about a few specific things depending on the style of game it is. Mostly dealing with kind of like rule sets and the scope of the game, right? So the first kind of category is like more of your story games, I guess, and very loose mechanic stuff. So Itcher Spee is the first one that comes to mind for me. So if you haven't played Itcher Spee or you don't know what it is a really awesome and amazing thing. It's a surrealist noir game, is how it's described, and it comes out of either Sweden, Finland, or Norway, one of the Scandinavian countries. And its resolution mechanic is a set of 8 cards, and when you do something you have a chance of failure at, you choose someone, they draw one of the cards, and then they narrate what it says on the card, and it's either yes and, no but, like those kind of things. There's 8 different versions of that, and they get to narrate what happens. And then the story moves on from there, basically, right? So this is a very story game kind of thing, right?
And if you're looking for something incredibly system-light, you can find everything from Fiasco, that's a little bit more lighthearted and fun, running the gambit, to like Dread, which is like suspense horror, to A Penny for My Thoughts, which is just like storytelling, personal horror, Microscope, which is like world building and history storytelling. So there's a plethora of games available that do one-shot storytelling well,
very
A Quiet Year.
Yeah.
So
when it comes to these games, how do you think of any strategies that you do differently because they are a very simple rule system and they're more about the ambiance and the feeling of the story as opposed to like the rules and the crunch of it?
You mean things that you do differently as far as selling the game to the players?
That, and when you start running it. It's like, let's say that we've got the game up off the ground, right? And the players want to play whatever this game is that we sold them, right? Whether it's Itcher Spee or Fiasco or whatever. At this point, Fiasco is kind of easy because most people have probably heard of it, and that's obviously a one-shot, and it's almost more of, I don't even know, it's like its own kind of game almost. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of RPG, kind of party game, I don't even know. Or Dread is a great example of it, too. And what are things that you did when you started your Dread game? Because I think you were the first person at our table to run Dread. So is there anything that you think of that you did like to get that more storytelling style game up off the ground to make it work better?
I think Dread is kind of a unique monster because of the way character creation works, with the surveys. Mm-hmm. So I put a lot of thought into those, and I selected which one of you was going to get which survey, based on how I thought you would enjoy the game.
Okay. A big feature of a lot of these games is the way kind of character creation and the story structure is built. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of work put into how the characters are built and how the game is framed up. And I think if you, like you said, you do some work beforehand, knowing your players and knowing what they like, the character types that they like, and maybe if it's a Dread style game, like what they find a little more horrific or whatever, and using that to sort of build a better framework for your game.
Right. There is some coaching that goes into the Dread game format, too, because you have to encourage people, like, don't write one-word answers to this. Mm. Like, I need you to write basically a mini story.
Right.
By the time you put together the answers to these, 10 to 15 questions, you should have, like a one-page story about your character. And the other thing I did for that game was I picked a very familiar setting. Like, it's a horror game, and we played in basically a haunted mansion. Mm-hmm. So I picked a setting that even if you guys weren't familiar with the system and the game, you were familiar with that type of story.
Right. Well, that's something, because some of these story games are a very hard leap for people. It's very hard to go from playing like a 3rd edition style game or a Pathfinder where you're calculating synergy bonuses and 5 skill ranks in this gives me a +2 here, to where something is very, very loose, and it's more about, answer, what does your character find the most horrific about this murder scene that happened potentially in the mansion, right? And that being an essential piece of the character, right?
Right.
It's just very, very different. So I guess Itcher Spee is very similar to it with the questionnaires and the way you build your characters with that kind of thing, as it is in Dread and a lot of these other kind of games that are very much in this kind of a vein. And just make sure that you put the effort in at the beginning to where you have constructed enough conflict or whatever it is that you're looking for to really make the game shine. Because Dread, I think, as long as you have a basic horror story, Dread will basically do all of the work for you. It is
pretty much the easiest RPG to run with zero experience.
Yeah.
The book reads well. It's got a whole list of sample questions to get your brain moving.
Right.
And you know what to plan for because some of the answers to your questions are inherent in the questions themselves. So, I don't say, what item do you have that's special? I tell you, you have an engraved pocket watch. Why is it important to you? So then I may not know why it's important to you, but I know at some point in time I'm going to need to make the pocket watch something that matters. Otherwise, it doesn't need to be on your questionnaire at all. So I already know the things and objects and people that are important to your character, and I know to bring those things up. It's very leading in your running the game, which makes it so easy. Plus, it's a one-shot anyway, and horror is not terribly difficult. I mean, you can mess it up, and when you mess it up, it's really, really bad. But
well, sometimes when you mess it up, though, it turns into Evil Dead, and it's hilarious.
Right, but then you get a B-rated horror movie.
Right.
It's not ruined, but
well, one thing that I think you said without saying it is, in those style of games, every question matters. Every single question makes a difference. So make sure whatever questions that you ask in terms of creating these characters, that you make those answers matter in some tangible way in the game. Dread does this, Idris B, Fiasco even does it, Penny for Your Thoughts, all those more, story-style games, avant-garde kind of things or whatever, they're very much based around that. So I don't want to harp on it.
If you want to run a crunchier game, if you're talking about something that's only going to be 2 to 3 sessions, then you don't maybe need to have the character sheet completely fleshed out.
Right.
Like when we talked with Kurt about running at Gen Con, about building the characters and that, only put things on the character sheet that will be relevant in the 2 to 4 hours that you have to run this game. If it's not, then it is just going to slow things down.
Right. So I don't want to harp on this one too much because most of it just comes down to making sure you have your setting and the vibe and not vibe, the ambiance and themes of the game really hammered out. And a lot of these games are asking questions about who the character is and making sure that you use those questions to their max and make them leading to elicit more out of your players. Also, don't be scared to hand them the sheet back and say, I need more from this. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And also make every question matter in game.
I feel like we're not really talking about getting them to play RPGs anymore. We kind of went off on
that one. Well, yeah, that was a pretty big tangent. But, let's talk about low crunch games and get a little more concrete about some things, right? So low crunch in my mind means things like Powered by the Apocalypse games or Fate, and that's both Fate Accelerated and Fate Core, or any of the different iterations of it that are out there, right? Apocalypse World is very low crunch, but one of the big things that I always hear about it is that it's too hard to do anything and you always fail, right? But
you don't always fail. You succeed with extreme consequences.
It makes.
That's actually the most likely thing to happen based on
statistics of the dice. Yeah, your job is to make the players' lives more complicated, right? But in terms of putting the game together, I think with low crunch games, you can go all in with all of the rules. They're usually pretty simple and easy to explain. I actually just saw a cartoon. Like a comic strip thing that explained the Fate Core rules. I think in like a 2 or 3 page comic book style thing, and I was like, wow, that's really pretty awesome. But it just shows how easy it is to put these rules together. Now, Apocalypse World does it even better because each player gets their own playbook, and it has all the details of everything you need on your character sheet right there. It has how all of your different individual moves work and everything. Plus, you have the basic move sheet or whatever. But basically, the player has everything they need right in front of them, and it's basically on 1 or 2 pieces of paper. So I think these games, you just go right at it. You put the pedal to the metal, let it rip, and throw all the rules at them because essentially there's not that much there.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that, or do you think?
I agree with that. I think for your regular D&D people, you usually do have an idea about the kind of character you want to play when you sit down. So I think when it comes to Fate, because the character creation is a lot different than it is for your standard, D&D Pathfinder style game, that you have a conversation first about what kind of character you want to play, and don't just tell me if I want to play an elf. Okay, well, what kind of elf are you going to play? What makes your elf so special?
Right.
Kind of get them talking about how they want their character to be before you ever even hand them a character sheet, and then say, okay, well, you told me Elfie McElverson is, really sneaky. So then make one of your attributes a phrase that has to do with that.
Right. One of the cool things is that Fate, initially, at least Fate Core, came with the character creation worksheet, which wasn't a character sheet at all, and it puts me in a different frame of mind when I sit down to fill out a worksheet, just like the same thing happens with Mouse Guard or Burning Wheel. I think Torchbearer probably has it as well, but I haven't played Torchbearer. But those things will help the players get off on the right foot, because a lot of these games are drastically different in a lot of ways than a traditional F20 D&D style game, right? And the big difference between Apocalypse World and Fate is, on Apocalypse World, all that stuff is spelled out right on the character sheet for you. Boom. It's all right there, right? It's all very personalized. It's all right there for your character. I pick a few things and I'm ready to go, whereas with Fate, you really do have to sit down and make a character sheet, right? Or a character.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, if you are too concerned about the character creation process, I'm a big fan for it when it comes to introducing players to different games of just making the characters for them, or making it half the way and they can add, skill points and customization where they want. Now, with Apocalypse World, I don't think so, because Apocalypse World is so basic anyway. You let them make the entire character.
Yeah, it's like there's like 4 things.
Right.
Circle and peg it as low thought as it gets, which I love about it.
Circle a name, circle a style of clothes, circle a demeanor, pick 2 moves, off to the races, right? Right on.
I feel like there's almost 2 schools of thought when it comes to trying out new things with your players. And one is to, if you're going to be doing a drastically different system, to do a world that is similar. So like with Fate, to do Fate of Freeport. So it's still sort of like your D&D atmosphere, but now you're trying out a different system. So it's kind of like easing into the transition.
Oh, do you think so?
Or you can say, okay, well, we've been playing D&D, try and steal the dragon's treasure for the last 6 months. So today we're going to play, I don't know, techno space monkeys trying to steal sunshine from leprechauns.
Right.
And just be like, okay, hard left.
Right.
But I don't think you should do any kind of like in between kind of thing. So there's either different system, same world, or completely different whole nother thing.
I don't know. I like Fate of Freeport a lot. But I think if you're coming from a fantasy world to try and run a different style game, that maybe you should try and take the other option and move further away from it, because I feel like if you have players that are not fully on board and you're playing Fate of Freeport, they may just be like, well, why don't we just play D&D? Why don't we just make these characters as D&D characters? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but what I'm thinking is that you have those players that are like, I don't want to play anything other than D&D. So you're like, okay, well, I'm going to tell that story, but I want you to try with this system and tell me maybe you like this system better.
I see what you're saying.
You know what I mean? Like,
right.
It's almost like trickery.
It's sort of like a halfway house to getting to better games.
Right.
and I'm
easing into the pool. So it depends on what kind of players you have, I would think. But me, I'm all about techno space monkeys, but
right on, but not Star Wars.
But not Star Wars. Techno space monkeys, yes. Star Wars, no.
With the low crunch games, it's all in right away. Throw all the rules at them because they're pretty easy to explain and pretty clear, right?
Right.
Now, when it comes to what we're going to call medium crunch, which is games like Lamentations of the Flame Princess, which if they're already playing D&D anyway, and you move them into LOTFP, I think you can just go right at it. It's pretty much right in there.
Where I think you're like, okay, well, this is a system you guys are pretty familiar with, but now instead of exploring this, we're going to go explore Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Right. Or if you really even want to, a thing that I've actually come around to now just recently from sitting down and talking to Kyle about taking some of those LOTFP modules and just moving them straight across into your Pathfinder or 5th edition. I think it would be easy. I think it would be easier than most people think to move them over. And
I think it would be easy, but why would you want to?
I don't disagree.
Why would I want to open 3 books on my lap in order to translate this story when I could open this one book?
Right. No, I'm all about. I think for me, Lamentations has probably replaced D&D for me in my mind anyway. I really just love that game. I mean, I haven't done D&D forever. Really love that game.
And like as a player, it's not so bad. But when I ran my last trying to run a D&D game, I was like, oh, I have no idea what page anything is on. I quite literally had 3 different books opened up in front of me of multiple pages, and I was trying to flip back and forth to figure out what I was doing. But even outside of that, I know a story I want to tell. Why do I need all this crap to bog me down?
Right. But the thing is Lamentations is so clean and easy. I mean, I don't want to go on a huge wank about how awesome Lamentations is. I think we've done that a whole lot in the past couple months, but I guess the only thing to say is that it is a great game, and it transitions your players from, if they are already playing a D&D fantasy-style game with D20s, they will move into Lamentations like it's nothing, and you may find that they like it even better because it is kind of grittier in a different way, and the classes are so specialized and everything. Like, they have their very own feel. But when it comes to that style of game, I think you can throw all the rules at them right away, right? When a Lamentations game, if they're coming from a D&D thing.
Yeah, that one's fine.
Now, another medium crunch game that we introduced to our table recently was Tales from the Loop. And when you introduced that to us, we made our characters and it came on a worksheet, and that one, the character creation went pretty well. But that game was laid out to do it pretty easily and pretty well in addition to all that. But did you throw all the rules at us right away? Because we've played 3 or 4 sessions of that game.
I kind of mentioned all the ways that you could manipulate dice rolls, I guess, for that game, ways to get bonuses and stuff like that. But I didn't really encourage anything outside of the basic die roll until we've had more than one session. So the first session was just basic, here's your dice, did you pass or did you fail? And then I slowly added okay, well, don't forget you have these luck points. And then I added, okay, well, but you've got bonus successes. So here's some things you can do with those, and encouraging you guys to help each other with rolls and, what do they call that? Iconic items. Mm-hmm. Sorry. So basic rolls and iconic items were sort of the first thing that we started with. And then I was reinforced rules that I'd already told you as we went on in other sessions.
So would you say you gave us probably 80 to 90% of the rules in the first session?
Yeah.
And then gradually added a few more components as we went along?
Yeah, that's fair.
I think it worked well because I remember it's a lot of things to absorb in a one game session sometimes, and it can get overwhelming, especially when you're trying to figure things out.
Right.
I couldn't imagine sitting down to try and learn 3rd edition as your first game. I came to that already as an experienced gamer and was like, oh, this is so easy. How do you not know how to do this? But now looking at it years later, I'm like, my God, to learn that game from the ground up is crazy, But I feel like the difference, this middle ground of crunchy game, of this middle section of games that have a little bit of crunch but not a crazy amount, right? That I feel like you can take a piece of everything that we say out of both low crunch and the high crunch games. I don't know that there's one rule for all the medium kind of style games, because Unisystem games, right? The All Flesh Must Be Eaten and Connex and that kind of stuff, right? Character creation is kind of daunting in that. There's a lot of skill points to spend, right? So when it comes to that game, pre-gens might be a better idea. But in Tales from the Loop, that's more like the Apocalypse World style thing where you're doing a worksheet and you're circling things, making choices.
I almost think when you're talking about the Unisystem game, so for All Flesh Must Be Eaten, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory what's going to be happening.
Right.
But, I would just take the list of skills and just cut them, in half. And then if somebody specifically asks if they can have this other thing, then be
sure.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
But there's no reason you can't trim that skill list down similar to prefabbing your survey questions for a Dread game.
Right.
These are the things that I'm going to emphasize. Mm-hmm. So here's the list of skills that I think suits that. And if you want to know also how to cook a 5-star meals, and feel free and try and make that applicable in my game.
Right. As it turns out, the 7-course dinner is not relevant in the zombie apocalypse.
And the same thing with when you're talking about Connex, we had talked about a little bit before on an episode about the list of agencies that you can be from. Mm-hmm. So don't present them with the entire list of agencies they can be from.
Right.
Be
Pare that down.
Here's 5.
Right.
And if you have somebody that is really politically government conspiracy oriented and they're okay, but no, I really want to be from MK Ultra, and everybody else is I don't know what that is. Well, it's fine. That one person can be from MK Ultra and everybody else can be from the FBI. Whatever.
So now the bulk of this is where my mind is for high crunch games. I think it's kind of hard to sell people, myself included, on playing a very large game, right? I, to be honest, almost have no interest in big games anymore because
there are some where the juice is worth the squeeze.
I agree.
So
I was proven wrong with the Genesis, okay? So, I have, up until Gen Con, I had no desire to get another big game. I just didn't. We have so many smaller games, and I like them so much, and I just wasn't into getting another big game. And then I stumbled into Genesis and saw it and just absolutely fell in love with it, right? Now, I put it in the same category as I would Vampire the Masquerade or any of the Chronicles of Darkness or World of Darkness games?
Yeah, they're similar. It's a D10 system.
Yeah.
Attribute plus skill.
Right.
So the system is something that's familiar ground.
Mm-hmm. But if you're coming to it from a D&D perspective, it can be a bit of an adjustment, but it's not huge. The mechanics of it are very simple and very straightforward to understand. Every role is going to be ability plus attribute. So that part of the rules is very basic. However, when it comes to getting into disciplines or potentials and degenesis or anything, any of these big games, there's a lot there. So when we first started playing, we've had one probably 5 or 6 hour session, I think, that we had of Degenesis, and the same is true when I first started, when I introduced people to Vampire the Masquerade, is that I don't incorporate every rule. We use the very basics of everything. In Degenesis, we just have the, what do you call it, triggers when you get a 6, just made extra damage is what they did. Or they added, like if it was a non-combat roll, it added largeness to the success. But that's the key thing there is so much to those games. When you look at the amount of discipline lists, and each of those disciplines have 5, holy cow, it's unfathomable.
But it's not any more daunting than your standard Dungeons & Dragons game, because you're still talking about, here's your core attributes, here's your list of skills, here are the feats that you bought, and now you have greater whatever it is attack, and now you can get Bull Rush or improve.
Right.
I don't even know what the hell are.
I feel like the difference is between playing a person who plays a spellcaster is probably not going to mind it because they're used to thumbing through loads of different spells and figuring out what they want to do. But a person who does not like to play spellcasters, right, probably doesn't want to sit through and look at a whole list of 3 different disciplines, plus all this other stuff that they have with their backgrounds, allies, contacts, influence, all this kind of stuff, right? They don't want to look through all that. They just don't. So whatever you do, make sure you have that pared down to where I think really if you just make characters initially is probably the best way to go. Because that way you've already made the decision. Maybe they've got 2 disciplines, 1 at 3, 1 at 2. Starting characters would be like 1 at 2 and 1 at 1, I guess. And then, your choices for backgrounds. And then it just streamlines everything down. And all the little, I guess in the new version of Vampire, they don't have all the extra stuff for kicks and
the thing I like about Vampire is that you can disregard all of those things and make mortals initially. So you get familiar with your character, you get familiar with character creation. You don't have to worry about any of those disciplines or any of the blood pool or any of that out the gate. You play 2 sessions of mortals. By the time you get a handle on the basic rules, and you're like, now I'm going to kill you all in ceremonial fashion, and look, you're rebirthed.
Yeah, but I think if you're trying to sell people on playing Vampire the Masquerade that have never, this is your only shot at getting them to play Vampire, right? Then you've got to let it roll and make them vampires out the gate, have the characters created for them, and let them go at it.
I don't know. I think there's something very powerful and evocative of specifically a World of Darkness game in killing characters in the first session and making them vampires. That's right what away. I liked about the Sabbat game that we did, like the whole getting shoveled thing. There is nothing that very firmly sets you on the belief that it
severs your ties with the mortal world,
right? And you don't have that in D&D. I'm the epic hero. Nobody is more bigger and badder than me, except for that dragon over there. But hey, in the World of Darkness, it is not like that. You are an ant amongst men, and I think that it just really sets the tone when you make that imbalance of power very apparent in the first game.
Right on. I guess you could take that one either way, because I think I could see a situation where if you go through a compelling embrace, right, and obviously that shoveling in that case with the Sabbat game is going to be a much different case for embracing someone versus if it's a Camarilla style game and they get embraced to be members of the Camarilla in the traditional sort of fashion, right? That's a totally different kind of scenario there, but I can see what you're saying. But if you're going to do it where you're going to run them through a kind of a traumatic embrace, I think that you have to have that more or less drilled down so you know where it's going to go, because if you don't, it could go wrong very fast, and then you suck all the air out of the game, essentially, and it doesn't go well. One big thing is that Vampire the Masquerade and all the World of Darkness line is well known for the amount of meta plot that it has and how big of a storyline that game has. And DeGenesis has a lot of the same things too. The core game is 2 books, and 1 book is nothing but setting. It's 300 pages of just setting information, right? Now, when I introduced that game to you guys, I did not draw in hardly any of that. I picked 2 different cultures to draw in from, and then just the different cults that you guys are from. And the same thing with Vampire. Everybody's should be largely familiar with the city that you're working in, right? And then just the clans that you're involved in. So if it's a Camarilla game, there's only 7 to worry about. I did not draw in everything in the world. So what I like to do is to just introduce a piece at a time. So I figure out what it is in this game that I'm going to involve. So if there's only 4 clans among the characters, those are the 4 clans that I use. And I might introduce another one in that game. Or in the second game, I might introduce 2 more or whatever, right? So you're kind of growing the game out from the center so that they're not being blasted by all of this stuff at once, and then they can sort of learn as you go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I also think with these games, it goes back to what I talked about you don't know the tropes, and sometimes that freezes people up. So I think it's important to have, when there's a world that's completely unfamiliar, to have a very structured first couple of sessions until they understand what this world is all about and what they should be doing or what they could be doing. So before you go giving the choices of like, okay, well, you guys are downtown, what are you going to do?
Right.
Like, don't do that to them in the first game, because they'll be like, I'm going to walk around.
Well, don't be afraid to explain the tropes, I guess, because if they don't know, they don't know. So I guess one big thing would be is don't punish the players or beat them up with things they don't know.
Right.
So like that common sense merit you mentioned earlier, like for anybody that we have that comes to our table brand new playing World of Darkness, I just assume, hey, don't spend the points, but you have this merit. Mm-hmm. And if they're doing something that is a huge mistake, don't be afraid to say, hey, just so you know, this is not the best idea. There are rules to the society or whatever it is they're doing.
And if that doesn't get the point across, then don't be afraid to say no.
Right.
You're not. No, I'm sorry. You're a player in this game, but you're not going to wreck my entire game by doing whatever this thing. You're not going to try and eat the prince. It's not going to happen.
Right.
I think we were talking about making games with Kurt the other day, and he said something about making sure that you have the laws of the world established and making sure your players know what those are and not breaking them. Mm-hmm. So if there's a certain thing that is just never going to be there, like if magic is never going to be a thing, is not a thing in this world, then let players know that that's not a thing, and don't suddenly make it a thing several sessions later, because you're just going to confuse people. Right. Maybe magic is a bad example, but in a world without dragons, there are not going to be dragons.
Resurrecting from the dead is a common one. There's a lot of worlds where no one is ever resurrected from the dead. Once you're dead, that's final. That's it, right? But I think we were talking about Harry Potter. This when
we were talking about the Harry Potter game.
Yeah, and so
magic is all a thing, but you're never going to bring someone back from the dead in the Harry Potter world. That is a hard rule,
right? And
you have to stick to that rule, or it's chaos. Chaos,
madness. All right, well, I guess we there's some games we should probably mention that are even higher crunch than most games, like Aces and Eights, which isn't terribly. I mean, it's a high crunch game, but character creation is very daunting. If you're going to run that, make the characters.
Yeah,
just make the characters.
Pre-gens would be handy the first 5 times you play that.
Hackmaster is similar. It takes a lot to make characters. I guess for a lot of these games that are just medium to high crunch, unless it's got some streamlined character creation thing, just make the characters, because. Or if they're already not on board with playing struggling to play the game, if you have to spend an hour and a half creating characters, you've probably already lost them. So
it's also okay to do a modified character creation. So give them pre-gen characters with a couple of things that they can make decisions about, so that they can add some personalization and feel like they have some agency in the character that they're making, but you're not spending an hour and a half on character creation.
Right. The other thing is even if you do make the characters all the way, you can say, is there anything else? Do you like what's on there? If they say, I really kind of would like to have something else here or this thing here, then just add some points or move things around. It's not that huge of a deal if you're trying to just introduce a game as concepts, right?
Right.
Burning Wheel is an interesting one because it's got a lot of crunchy bits to it, but one thing I will say about it, it is a modular game. There are 3 different levels of combat in there, whether it's a bloody versus test, a full-on fight, or a There's a third one where it's just one roll. And you can introduce that game in chunks modularly like you do, I mentioned, with the pieces of culture or metaplot in Vampire. And that worked well for me, so don't be afraid to do that a piece at a time if the game is designed to be done that way in a lot of ways.
The modified character creation for that one is a lot easier, too, because let's say we're going to play a game where we're all at sea. Mm-hmm. So maybe I make 3 characters. They all have a first set of, what is it called?
Seafaring. Oh, life path?
Life path. Yeah, they all have the set life path of seafarers already.
Right.
But maybe I'm going to give you the choice on what the second life path is. Mm-hmm. So you're not bogged down with trying to pick out 3 different career paths and figuring out which skills I select for each one of those and so on and so forth.
Right. All right, well, I think that'll do it for us. One other thing, though, I guess to mention is that keep in mind if you're convincing your players to get on board with you for a one-shot or a couple sessions as a palate cleanser to introduce a new game, give them the chance to try it out, and just keep in mind that you may be setting things up to run whatever the game is you want to run, you truly want to run in the future. Because if this is a group of people that you really enjoy gaming with, and you know you're going to be gaming with them for a while, don't be afraid to play the slow game, I guess, and introduce a game, go back to your more traditional game, what you guys are playing, and then the next time be like, hey, do you guys remember when we played that vampire game? We really had fun. What do you think about playing a bigger vampire game? And trying to go that route and playing the slow game, I guess, is what I'm trying to get to.
And if you're going to go through all this trouble to begin with, don't crap out halfway through.
Right.
Plan your game ahead of time with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and follow through. Otherwise, the next time you say, hey, I want to try this game, like they're going to be like, no. You remember that last time when you ran this for 3 sessions and then you never finished the game?
Right.
It will be like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is if you really are dead set on running some of these different style game, don't be afraid to start planning it now while you're playing your main game as it is. That gives you more than enough time to lay out what you want to do and build your world and build your story and how you want to put it together and the pieces that you need to really, really hone it down and get it as razor sharp as you can, I guess. A lot of metaphors in this episode by me today. I don't know what the deal is.
Random weird idea. What do you think about taking characters from a game that's finished and transplanting them into a new game? I mean, it would work probably pretty easy with like Lamentations of the Flame Princess, but maybe we've just finished this epic run and now we have all of these characters and I'm going to be like, oh, now you guys are at the chateau.
Oh, for like a cursed chateau?
Yeah, or whatever one shot it is. If it's something where it's a fantasy game and you can just roll over those same fantasies, like they're already invested in those characters. If it's genre
appropriate, I guess I could be on board with it. But if I was playing 15th level fighter and we're like, let's roll these guys into Tales of the Loop, I'm like,
well, I mean that doesn't work because it's not.
Right.
I mean, it has to be a genre congruent thing. I mean, but you could very easily translate a 15-level epic character that you've been playing for 6 months and have an actual feel on personality for. You could roll that over into a Fate game.
Oh, yeah. I agree. That might be a way to go, but I feel like in a way that it's better to start new because you're creating new ideas and new tropes and new storylines to encourage your players to step out of their comfort zone and try something new and try some new games. Then you might be better served by encouraging them to make new characters with fresh ideas and that kind of stuff. But I think it's easily doable. I mean, if it's the only way, it's the only way. You do whatever you got to do. But I think that in the long run...
well, I mean, let's be honest. Most of us are just remaking the same character.
Yeah, there's only a couple we generally play. But that's true. Although I think that's less and less true when you get into some of the more story games where you're building less around a class or less around a playbook. Maybe not. I don't know. I think maybe the archetype goes more and more into the background with some of those games because as you answer some of those more story-based questions, the framework the archetype that you're building your character on kind of gets pushed more and more and more to the background. If that makes any sense. Okay, sounds good. All right, well, I think that'll do it for us this week. So if you guys have any times where you guys have introduced players to a new game or however you coerced them into doing it, whether it was through bribery or subterfuge, feel free to let us know. Drop us a line on Twitter at JustOneMoreFix.
Willingness was not an option. Bribery or subterfuge. But didn't quite come out right. Yeah, so just willing participation, not an option.
It is, I suppose. So if you have had success, drop us a line on Twitter at JustOneMoreFix, or you can email me James at justmorefix.com, and we'll share your guys' stories. As you guys know, we've joined the Gonna Geek Network, so
once you guys are done with our episode, go ahead and hop on over to the Gonna Geek Network and check out Undaunted. So Laura Wisniewski shares a wonderful tale of turning an overactive mind into a brand new career by way of podcasting. I couldn't pronounce her name, but you won't forget her story.
Right on. So, yeah, check out Undaunted. I actually haven't listened to them. Have to check that one out. Very cool. I think that'll do it for this week. As you guys probably saw, that we finally got our Tales from the Loop review put out. It took me a while to get that one edited. We recorded it quite a while ago. But we will be posting another poll for what we will review next, and that'll be up on Twitter in the next couple of days, and I'm going to try and figure out how to put the poll up on the Facebook group as well. And we will hopefully get that recorded here in the next couple of weeks to get another review put up to you guys. And as always, you guys can find us online at justmorefix.com or on Twitter at justmorefix. And if you like us, you should head over to wherever it is that you get your podcast from and give us a rating and a comment over there. But the best way you guys can help us out is by sharing us with another gamer or non-gamer. Share our awesomeness with them. I guess that'll do it for us. And until next week, we will see you guys later. Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at incompetech.com. You can find us at justonemorefix.com and follow us on Twitter at justonemorefix.